this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now. You call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Why have I asked my electrician I found on Angie.com to bury my pet hamster Nibbles in our yard for me? Because I was so moved by how carefully he buried my electrical wires, I knew I could trust him to bury my sweet Nibbles after his untimely end. Nibbles, gone too soon. May he scurry in peace.
Hey, sorry about your pet, but I just wire stuff.
Nibbles would have loved you like a brother.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on what your kids are spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/iHeart.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Back in the mid-'60s, my grandfather was in his pickup truck on a dark Arkansas road. A large owl swept in front of his windshield. It didn't so much scare him as it gave him a feeling down in the pit of his stomach that something bad had happened. When he got back home, he got a phone call. It was a sister-in-law. His brother had died just 4 hours before. Rural folks many times believe that an owl is an omen, particularly if it crosses your path. Today's case on Body Bags, we're going to talk about Kathleen Peterson, her husband, and an owl. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Joining me today is my good friend, Jackie Howard, executive producer of Crime Stories with Nancy Grace. Jackie, what can you tell us about Kathleen Peterson?
Kathleen Peterson was a 48-year-old American businesswoman and philanthropist, and she died under suspicious circumstances in 2001. She was married to writer Michael Peterson. They had been married about 5 years at the time of her death. There's several theories out there, Joe, about what happened to Kathleen, and some of those have been made into a new docuseries, a documentary. There's lots of things floating out there, and I'd like to look at this case today in 3 separate parts. Kathleen was found dead at the bottom of a staircase. How she got there is the subject of all of these theories. So, number one, we have the accidental option. Number two, we have a murder option. And number three, you've already alluded to, is that an owl had a part to play in Kathleen's death. That evening, Kathleen and her husband had been drinking some wine, and Michael Peterson says he is outside having a cigar. Kathleen's back in the house. He says she combined the alcohol with Valium, and that is why Kathleen ended up at the bottom of a staircase, bleeding out, ultimately to her death. Let's start with some basic things, Joe. If you fall down a staircase, 12 to 15 stairs, can that kill you?
Well, most certainly it could, Jackie. And you have to think about any kind of impact like this, trauma-related, is going to be dependent upon not just where you strike, but what you strike, and kind of the composition and texture. I'll give you an example. If you fall down, say, a set of metal stairs in some industrial complex, that's going to leave a much different type of insult to the point of impact. That is where that energy transfers from the fall, say, for instance, in the back of the head, where the head actually strikes that fixed object. That's going to look a lot different. Say, for instance, if you have, say, a highly finished surface, like a wood surface that's kind of rounded, this sort of thing, like the treads on the stairs in a residential location, that appearance is going to be completely different. And of course, in the case of Kathleen Peterson, we're talking about a very high-end home in Durham, North Carolina. These stairs, though they're the rear stairs, are finely constructed. The edges are not real rough, if you know what I mean. They're finished, polished, that sort of thing. Now, that can make for kind of a tricky thing to ambulate across. And you mentioned just a moment ago that she did have alcohol on board. As a matter of fact, it was like 0.07, I think, is her alcohol limit that they determined at autopsy. And she did, in fact, have Valium on board. But let's keep in mind one thing as we kind of go through this discussion. Michael Peterson stated that she left and walked into the house. It's not like, many people would say she was knee walking drunk, because she's not. 0.07, even with Valium on board, is not going to inhibit you to the point where you're out of control. She had the ability to ambulate when he last saw her.
Okay, so we know that Michael was outside, so he did not, according to his comments to the police, know that she fell. When he came inside and found her at the bottom of the stairs, there was a lot of blood around, which would indicate that she had a head wound. So he calls 911, tells the 911 operator that she is still breathing. So what would account for that large volume of blood?
It goes certainly to a head strike. We've talked about this before on body bags, and I'll say it again, for this purpose, because I can't think of another case that it's going to carry as much weight in as with the Kathleen Peterson case, and that is the head is the most vascular area of the body. And it's not, it's not just the features of the face that require a tremendous amount of blood supply, but it is in fact the brain. So you've got this huge network of vessels that run throughout the head. And that's why many times when you have a head strike and your head opens up, you bleed copiously. There's tremendous amounts of blood coming forth. And it's not surprising that he walked in and found essentially at the base of the stairs, kind of this complex. You've kind of got a turn in the staircase. There's a mini landing down there, and you've got blood all over the top surface. You've got it on the facing of the stairs, kind of where it's boxed in, and then you've got it underneath the lip. You've also got some on the walls as well.
Joe, let me stop you for just a second. When Michael comes in and finds her body, we don't have an idea of how long that she has been lying at the bottom of the stairs. So if she has a head wound, for there to have been this amount of blood that we are told was there, if she just has a head wound, is her blood going to spill out at that kind of a rate?
Yeah, most certainly it can, because, that's an indication, first off, that her heart is still beating, at least during this moment. Remember, we have 3 states when we begin to talk about death investigation. We have antemortem, which means before. We have perimortem, which means in the throes of, like right in the middle. And then, of course, we have postmortem, all right, which is after death. So in that antemortem and perimortem phase, individual will still have agonal respirations. They will still have circulation going on. So all the while you have that arterial flow and some of the venous seepage too, where, you've got the blood that's still trying to return, go back through the entire system. It has to cycle through the lungs and back through the heart and all these sorts of things to be pumped back out. So this is still going on. So blood is actually emanating from these particular areas. But Jackie, the interesting thing about this, it's one thing when you have a head strike and you have a single injury. And as I've stated, you're going to bleed out profusely from that one location. And kind of course, a lot of that is dependent upon the size of the insult as well. But Jackie, in Kathleen's case, she's got 7 very nasty lacerations that essentially involve the backside of her head. So for me as a death investigator, if you're trying to sell me on this idea, when you fall and gravity is drawing you down toward the treads of that staircase and you impact on that particular area, that is not something I'm going to buy. This is something that would have required a forceful attack. It would have involved multiple strikes. Now, also, if you're trying to tell me, well, she went back up the stairs and fell not just once, but twice, multiple times, I'm not buying that either. And these are very, very centralized insults that she sustained to the back of her head.
But you're talking about the amount of blood that was at the scene, Joe. Even if she had 7 lacerations or wounds, how much blood as your heart pumps is actually going to come out of those lacerations? I mean, short of cutting an artery or a vein is when we think of large amounts of blood gushing. How much blood are we actually talking about coming from those wounds?
Quite a bit. And just so our listeners understand, when you hear people holding forth on ideas about the amounts of blood that you see at the scene, it can be very, very difficult to quantify that amount. And a lot of that is dependent upon the surface. Where the blood actually settles on. If you're talking, for instance, like a carpeted surface, there's no way to quantify that because, you got multiple layers there. Then you think about, to what degree has the blood dried? And the drying of blood is an issue in this particular case as well. There are a couple of people that actually stated at the scene they saw dried blood. So that involves a time factor. Where you think about the elements of the indwelling environmental conditions, relative humidity, temperature, all these sorts of things. And also, you have no idea as to the depth of the blood that's being distributed all over the place. Because depth is important when we're measuring volume. Let's just think about that. The depth of, say, for instance, a swimming pool. We can look in the shallow end and it appears to have quite a bit of water there. You go to the deep end, it's even more. It's kind of simple science, but you have to understand there's no way to measure that at a scene relative to a pool. So your ability to quantify the amount of blood that was lost at the scene, even though it is appearance, at least, is a large pool, you don't understand the thickness. And of course, that follows relative volume as well.
So going along with the amount of blood that was found in the house, let's look at this forensically. When the police arrived, they first believed that this is an accident, that Kathleen has fallen down the stairs based on what her husband has said. So we find forensically that a lot of things are going on that impact what you should have been able to tell happened. Police did not cordon off the scene immediately. We had the son come in and he tracked blood as he came through to the kitchen. There were blood smears on the wall that police were not originally sure where they came from. And you had neighbors and friends coming over to see what was going on as they saw the police activity. So you have lots of people impacting your crime scene. What do you do?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this goes back to, my hero that I've mentioned several times, Edmond Locard. Edmond, plainly stated that every contact leaves a trace, that everybody brings something to a scene that has the potential to bespoil this environment, where, and it could be any number of things. It could be the dirt on their shoes. It could be the shoes that they're wearing and the texture of those shoes and how it transfers the blood that's indwelling at the scene. They step in it and transfers it to another location. It could be them. Hey, we were talking about the volume of blood. You don't know what's going on outside. So when you open that door multiple times, you can have wind that blows through there. You can have any number of trace elements that come in there. Wind can impact the scene itself. And not to mention, you don't have accountability relative to who is engaging and interacting with the decedent as well. Now, we do know that 2 EMTs arrived at the scene. Then you have the police, and then you have this kind of cast that comes in afterwards. It's at that point in time, and it's one of the things that we teach young police officers, that when they arrive at a scene, it's so very important to actually secure that area and keep everybody out. And do you realize how hard it is to tell a family member to stay out of a scene? And that's very difficult, but sometimes the police have to stand up and say, no, you cannot come in here at this point in time. And it's hard to know when this transitioned from, say, for instance, an emergent event, where you're trying to render aid, to when this actually became identified as a crime scene. Those are two different milieus, if you will. It's kind of a fancy word for the environment in which this is all occurring. So when is it that they geared back and they said, hey, whoa, we need everybody to exit as quickly as you possibly can. Everybody step out. And it's at that point in time that you have to cordon off the area. You have to sequester those individuals that actually made contact in the scene, because they're going to walk off and they might have evidence on them. We go back to this idea of shoe prints. There was actually a shoe print that was found on Kathleen's sweatpants. I would want to know the provenance of that shoe print. I'd like to know the point of origin relative to that shoe print. Because Michael's shoes and socks were actually on the floor adjacent to her body. So how did that dynamic occur? I want accountability for everybody that's there, because everybody that touches this thing actually has the ability to destroy the entire case before it even gets started.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Hi, I'm Cindy Crawford, and I'm the founder of Meaningful Beauty. When Dr. Sabah and I decided to do a skincare line together, he said to me, we are going to give women meaningful beauty. And I said, that's exactly right. We want to give women meaningful beauty, which means each and every product is meaningful. It has a reason to exist. It's efficacious. You're going to get results. And then you just go out and live your life.
Meaningful Beauty. Confidence is beautiful. Learn more at meaningfulbeauty.com. Why have I asked my HVAC guy I found on Angie.com to change my grandpa's trachea tube? Because I was so amazed by how quickly he replaced our air ducts. I knew I could trust him to change Pop-Pop's tube while I was on vacation.
Make it quick, young man.
Aw, see? Pop-Pop trusts you.
I think we should call a doctor.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose?
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
You know, as a death investigator, you show up at the scene, you're begging for information from the dead. I know that sounds quite bizarre, but, you know, there's that old adage that we always talk about we speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves. And we read things into the life that they had led during the events of their death, and certainly what happened to the bodies afterwards. And that's important here in Kathleen Peterson's death, Jackie.
There's a big factor, Joe, that I want to talk about, going back to the blood just a little bit. The next theory that we're looking at here is the fact that Kathleen could have been murdered by her husband. So if Kathleen did not fall down the stairs and cause these 7 lacerations, as you described, to her head, then that means she would have been hit in the head. She would have been bludgeoned. And I find it very interesting, Joe, that there was one huge piece of evidence that points to the fact that she really could not have fallen down the stairs and remained in that supine position. What was it?
Yeah, it's the fact that she's got blood on the soles of her feet. You know, unless you want to go off chasing rabbits, theoretically, you begin to think about this and you think, well, you know, did some ne'er-do-well come up and paint the soles of her feet with her own blood? And obviously that's not going to be the case. So how do we arrive at a position where the blood winds up on the soles of her feet? And the only explanation is that after she was struck and blood began to seep from her head or pour from her head, or, you know, actually spray from her head if it's an arterial strike, then we have to believe that she walked through a pool of blood, her own blood, there that's distributed on the treads of those stairs, that there was an awareness on her part that she is essentially under attack. For me, you know, I visualize her in this environment and she's standing there, she's struck, or perhaps someone comes in from the top above her and strikes her as she's at the base of the stairs, and blood begins to seep down. She gets it onto the soles of her feet. One other indicator here that's absolutely fascinating to me is the fact that when her hands are actually examined, they find bits of hair caught on her hands and dried there, vis-a-vis the blood. And there's actually contused areas on the back sides of her hands, which, you know, almost gives you the impression of someone raising their hands above their head. They have an awareness they're being struck in the head, right? Just follow me here. And that area where you're struck, you know, what do we do when we sense that we have injured our head? It's a natural reaction to reach up and place our hand there to check ourselves or to protect ourselves. Was that what Kathleen was doing? And in the interim, blood is transferring to her fingers, the palms of her hands, and she pulls away and her own hair is caught there. So you've got this very dynamic situation that's taking place there at the base of that staircase, Jackie.
So then we need to move on and look at what possibly could have caused those lacerations, since we now don't believe they were caused by the fall. One theory that was raised was the lack of what's called a blowpoke. It is a fireplace utensil, that could have been the murder weapon. So What kind of a wound would a fireplace utensil cause? And is it consistent that it would have caused 7 lacerations as you described?
There's a high probability that it could. You're talking about a cylindrical shaped object, which essentially is a metal tube. You would have to be able to utilize this instrument so that you could deliver energy from a single strike, where you would raise it, say, for instance, above your head, or swing it from the side and hit a point of impact at that moment in time. And what happens, that energy that you're generating, let's just say, for instance, you're raising above your head and you're striking downward, that energy that you're generating by that force as you're bringing that thing down onto the top of her head transfers to that point of impact along the shaft of that blowpoke or an object similar to that, and it transfers to the skin. And what happens then? Well, it results in these lacerations. And just kind of on a little aside here, many people get very confused when they hear the term laceration. My friends in the medical community, they will use laceration very broadly. If somebody comes into an emergency room, you'll hear it in all the medical shows and whatnot, and they'll say they've got a lac. Well, that's an abbreviation for a laceration, but it could, that could indicate also a sharp force injury. This is not sharp force. And how do we delineate that? Well, when we examine these types of injuries in the morgue and you have a blunt force laceration where someone is struck, what will happen is that it will generate, first off, a very jagged wound. It will be very irregular. The edges, or what we refer to as the margins, will not be neat because there's actually a tearing. And if anyone wants to get an idea as to what this looks like, if anyone at home has, say, simply a pencil and an orange, you take the orange and you place the shaft of the pencil onto the surface of the orange and you press down. What happens? Well, the orange begins to rise around the sides of the shaft of that pencil. That's basically what happens with a laceration. The skin, as it's impacted, kind of wraps itself for just a moment around the sides of that cylindrical object. And the skin then begins to rip or tear. And that's why you get this real nasty looking injury that rises up. Now, if this were, say, for instance, a machete wound or an axe or something like that that has a milled edge, the edges are going to be very, very neat. It's not necessarily going to look like surgery, but they will be very well defined. The forensic pathologists call it defined margins. With this, you're not going to have that, because not only is the skin going to tear, guess what else is going to happen? You'll get these little abraded areas along the edge. And that gives you an indication that something has been torn at that moment in time. Now, could it be generated from a fall? Yeah, but it's going to be a single impact. I don't know of anybody worth their salt out there in forensic practice that's going to say that an individual would sustain this many lacerations from a single fall. Generally, you're going to see one, maybe two, but you're going to fall from a great distance in order to make that happen.
Joe, you brought up blunt force versus sharp force injuries, but Kathleen, even with all of these lacerations in her skull, she didn't have any skull fractures and there was no brain swelling. Wouldn't you expect that in a blunt force trauma?
Well, I think everybody automatically flees to this idea that if you have a laceration and that's associated with blunt force trauma, that there's going to be, say, for instance, a depressed skull fracture underlying that laceration, and that's just not the case. And when you begin to combine this with the other elements that we have going on, and let's just play devil's advocate here for a second. Let's say she was just struck once and it split her head open. Now, we could say that she might bleed to death, but it would take a much longer amount of time. What begins to take place here, though, after all of these strikes, is you have ischemia that's setting in. And so you have an individual that's losing blood.
Okay, Joe, wait a minute. Just let me interrupt you. Ischemia, what is that?
Ischemia is a condition that arises from a lack of oxygenated blood that's being supplied to the brain. So essentially it's being shunted or it's being impeded to making it back through the system because you're bleeding out. Essentially, you have a big defect in your body. And in Kathleen's circumstances, she had 7 of these things, Jackie. It's not just one. She had 7. So she's going to bleed out from these multiple areas. And listen, the longer someone is down in this environment where they've got what are referred to as just like agonal respirations, their heart's still pumping, and you just allow them to lay there, you got more time for them to kind of dwindle away. Now, one of the things that the forensic pathologist stated in this case that's quite fascinating, people have wondered, well, there's no hemorrhage essentially on the brain. There was some subarachnoid that was there that arises from a concussive event.
Okay, wait. I'm sorry. Subarachnoid. You gotta make me say what again?
Yeah, so with subarachnoid, the arachnoid surface of the brain is actually the surface of the brain as opposed to, say, subdural. Subdural, dura, meaning the sac that the brain is essentially encased in, and your cerebral spinal fluid kind of circulates around it. You can get actually a subdural hematoma, which is hemorrhage is trapped in between the dura sac and the surface of the brain, which has the arachnoid surface. The arachnoid surface is actually the surface of the brain, but this is inside of the brain. And this has arisen from what the forensic pathologist has characterized as a concussive injury. And she didn't just have one concussive injury, Jackie. She had multiple concussive injuries. And of course, this is the opinion of the forensic pathologist because there's not a lot of evidence to bear this out. She is essentially speculating, which she can do because she is a court qualified expert, that she died as a result of multiple concussive injuries to the brain. So, you think about, well, what is a concussion? Well, anybody that has ever heard a loud boom that goes off and it kind of rattles your cage just for a second, that's a concussion, a concussive event. So you've got her brain that is reacting to these blows where her brain is literally kind of sloshing back and forth inside of her skull. She's disoriented at that moment in time. She goes down maybe into an unconscious state. And all the while, her heart is still beating. Her lungs are still working. But guess what? The blood is not going where it should go. The blood is going all over the floor. The blood is going all over the treads of those stairs. And that's what led to her death.
One other point to consider, Joe, in talking about these blunt force injuries to her head. If she had fallen down the stairs, as was stated, you would have expected there to be some kind of injury to the neck. I would have to think being hit with not very much accuracy, if you're just swinging at someone's head, could hit other parts of the body. So what are we looking at in form of any kind of neck injuries that Kathleen had?
Yeah, you think about, this is a very dynamic event when somebody falls down a set of stairs. And one of the things that, and we check for this at the scene, actually, as medical legal death investigators, we look for what's referred to as crepitus. And crepitus is kind of I don't want to put anybody off by saying this, but hey, this is body bags. This is what we talk about. There's kind of a crunchiness that takes place in the neck. And if the neck is broken, I'm just talking about the initial external examination, you can actually feel this kind of crunchiness in the neck. And it gives you an indication that something's wrong. Of course, that has to be verified, just prior to autopsy at the morgue where you're going to do an x-ray of the body. But in Kathleen's case, there's no evidence of a broken neck. All of her vertebral bodies were intact, okay? However, I'm not concerned with the back of her neck, Jackie. What's fascinating to me about this whole case is one little injury that doesn't get talked about a lot, and that is this cartilaginous fracture that's taken place on the thyroid cartilage. And if everybody at home will essentially take your index finger and feel on the left side of your throat where, say, for instance, your Adam's apple is, and you just go above it. We say in our parlance, we say superior. There's a little bitty area up here. You can kind of feel it through your skin called cornu. And it's a little cartilaginous body. Jackie, she had a fracture. She had a fracture there. The cartilage was actually fractured. People don't think about cartilaginous fractures, but they do occur. And in my experience, at least, and this is way, way up in the neck, Jackie. I mean, way up. We're not, here's that infamous little bone. We're not quite at the level of the hyoid, but we're just below it. Okay. And so at that level, that little feature is actually fractured. Do you know what it takes to do that? It takes pressure, Jackie. It takes pressure directly applied to there. Or I guess you could say that if someone was struck with an instrument, you might could achieve that. But what they're seeing at the scene doesn't necessarily match up, for instance, with this blowpoke striking that area. So I don't know. I think that many people that might look at this might think that direct pressure was applied to that specific area, maybe consistent with a couple of hands, such as in the case of throttling, or where the hand is configured into a C, essentially, with the thumb dominant on the right side and the fingers digging into the neck on the left side and applying direct pressure to that area until that little area of cartilage snaps. Now, how in the world does a perfectly healthy woman, and she was healthy, her coronary arteries were almost completely clear, Jackie. She has not had a heart attack. She has not had a stroke. She doesn't really have that much indwelling natural disease going on. How does she sustain that specific injury? We can talk about the back of the head all day long, but how does this anterior or front of the neck insult occur?
She did not have any bruising around her neck, did she?
No, she didn't. Nothing that was truly significant in this particular case. And so that would, she had several other areas of insult she had some injuries on her back. She had some injuries on her arms. And of course, as I mentioned just a moment ago, there were those insults, of course, on the backs of her hands where she had clutched, hair in her hands that was dried in there and kind of stuck to the surface, or what are referred to as the palmar aspects of the hands, where the hair had come away from her head.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Hi, I'm Cindy Crawford, and I'm the founder of Meaningful Beauty. When Dr. Sabah and I decided to do a skincare line together, he said to me, we are going to give women meaningful beauty. And I said, that's exactly right. We want to give women meaningful beauty, which means each and every product is meaningful. It has a reason to exist. It's efficacious. You're going to get results. And then you just go out and live your life.
Meaningful Beauty. Confidence is beautiful. Learn more at meaningfulbeauty.com.
Why have I asked my electrician I found on Angie.com to bury my pet hamster Nibbles in our yard for me? Because I was so moved by how carefully he buried my electrical wires, I knew I could trust him to bury my sweet Nibbles after his untimely end. Nibbles, gone too soon. May he scurry in peace.
Hey, sorry about your pet, but I just wire stuff.
Nibbles would have loved you like a brother.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
Are you a fraud-paying American? It's a fact that 1 in 4 honest, hardworking, tax-paying Americans has been a victim of identity theft. With LifeLock Identity Theft Protection, though, if your identity is stolen, they fix it, guaranteed, and get you your money back. Last year, the IRS flagged over $16 billion in refunds for identity fraud. That's billions of dollars that could come from your salary, overtime, or second job. But this year, you don't need to stay a victim. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second for your personal information and alerts you to threats you could easily miss on your own. And if your information does fall into the wrong hands, only LifeLock has U.S.-based restoration specialists who are backed by the $1 Million Protection Package. Because this tax season, fraud-paying American is something no American should have to claim. Visit LifeLock.com/iHeart and save up to 40% your first year. That's 40% off at LifeLock.com/iHeart. Terms apply.
It goes without saying, I think that injuries can tell us a lot about a case and about what occurred in the moments just prior to death. But, Jackie, I got to tell you, in Kathleen Peterson's case, we have got so many injuries. There are so many insults. And to say that this is a dynamic case, I think is rather understatement of the facts.
It is, Joe. In fact, some would say it's fanciful in some aspects because of this third theory that Kathleen Peterson's death was caused by, of all things, an owl. All you have to do is Google the owl theory, and you'll find more than you ever want to know. It has been put out there that Kathleen was attacked by an owl, which caused her fall. Some are saying that her injuries on her head came from talons. How do you address that, Joe?
Well, first off, I would address it by saying that none of that evidence has ever made it into court. That the genesis of that evidence actually arises from a neighbor of the Petersons who happens to be an attorney in Durham. That he came up with this idea that perhaps it was, in fact, a particular species of owl that attacked Kathleen Peterson as she was running into the house. And suddenly, the owl may or may not have chased her. She tumbled down the staircase and struck her head. There was a single owl feather that was entered into evidence as I think probably an incidental finding. And then, I think kind of you use the word fanciful. I think that it is fanciful that this has been the foundation for this idea that a bird of prey attacked her at this particular time. Now, I will say this, owls are known to move around at night, hence the term night owl. Okay. They move around at night. They're kind of nocturnal animals. So I guess you could put that forward. But again, you got to give me something more than that, because they're saying that these injuries that she has sustained on the back of her head may be consistent with the talons of an owl, where essentially the skin has been incised by these talons and torn. And you have these avulsions, and avulsions are part and parcel of lacerations, and it gives you an idea of the amount of force that was used. One in particular is rather ghastly. There's kind of a triangular shaped avulsion that measures several centimeters in length, and it's kind of pie shaped, like a slice of pizza essentially, and it's flapped back over. I don't think that that's indicative of, say, for instance, a bird of prey, but it goes to the ferocity with which she was struck. This is a tearing event that takes place with this blunt force trauma where the cylindrical object is being driven down onto the external surface of her scalp, and it tears it away. And the reason you kind of get this pie shape, if you will, is the fact that she was struck once on one side, and then there was another strike that took place almost immediately adjacent, and it led to this tearing away, a tremendous amount of force. It wasn't significant enough so that it fractured the external table of the skull, but it was significant enough so that the skin itself was ripped away.
Joe, I find all this information that you're giving me about the lacerations and the injuries to the skull fascinating, but I've got to go back to the blood. The blood amount that is found on the floor. There is blood, as you said, on the bottom of her feet. There's blood on the wall. And you kind of alluded to, and we got away from it earlier, the difference between blood spatter and blood droplets. How is all of this going to come into play, Joe? Because we have heard contradicting evidence about what happened to that blood. Was the blood smear on the wall an effort to wipe it away? Was the blood droplets aspiration from her breathing out blood from her lungs? Address that for me.
I have to say, as a forensic scientist, you have to take great care when you move forward with bloodstain evidence that it is written in stone as to how you apply your assessment. And let me kind of break it down for you so our listeners understand. Let's say, for instance, you're talking about a latent print, okay, where print has been left behind by a suspect, okay? We dust that area, we find the print, we raise it, we lift it, okay? Then we have a database, a template, if you will, that we will go back and we will examine that print, see if it matches up with anything. And then we can begin to apply quantities or values to that print. And in the end, we have almost a mathematical assessment that validates that print. You don't have that with bloodstain. You don't. What template are you going to use? Now, we talk about bloodstain in terms of low velocity, medium velocity, and high velocity, and kind of that dynamic that takes place as blood is sprayed about or spread about and those sorts of things. How are you going to measure that and come back with a consistent template? And that's one of the reasons I think it was all the way back in 2009, Jackie. There was actually a federal study that was done relative to bloodstain evidence and questioning kind of the science behind it. And, you're going to have two separate people that will interpret this, and they can interpret it any number of ways because there is no hard and fast rule to constructing or reconstructing a scene relative to the dynamics of the bloodstains. So, you can look at a wipe or a swipe on a wall and you can get an idea that, yeah, probably something there happened relative to somebody attempting to clean up. But when you get what in this case would be medium velocity, which is consistent with someone swinging a bat, swinging a hammer, swinging a metallic cylindrical object, you can generate that kind of velocity because of the leverage that's involved in this, generating that injury. And you'll get these kind of particulate bits of spray that are deposited all over the place. With that, you begin to think, well, what could be the point of origin? Well, the prosecution said, well, this is definitely arises from a strike, multiple strikes. But then how are you going to talk about the overlay, and the dynamic of that, the movement of it in this kind of three-dimensional environment where you've got blood that's overlaying other blood stains and this sort of thing. Then you've got the defense. I think one of their witnesses got up on stand, Jackie, and said, oh, well, the blood that you're seeing on the wall here, this is aspirate. This is coming about as a result of her coughing up blood and spraying it onto the wall. Well, okay, I've seen that before. Famously, I saw it in the Jodi Arias case with Travis Alexander all over the sink. It was bloody aspirate, and that's medium velocity. It's very fine. But here's the problem. Her airway had no blood in it. Her lungs had no blood in them, and they were normal weight. It's not like they were heavily congested. In order to get blood into the airway, in order to aspirate and spray it out, you have to have a point of origin. There was no source for the blood to have been sprayed. So that, again, is a big problem. And I think, in my opinion at least, that both the prosecution's blood analysis and the defense's blood analysis, they cancel one another out in this case. So all we're left with at the end of the day in Kathleen Peterson's case is the assessment of the injuries. How did those injuries come about? And I can tell you, based upon what I've seen thus far and based upon my experience, I have to tell you, I don't think an owl did this.
Well, Joe, a jury did the exact same thing that you're doing here, weighed all three theories and came up with murder. Michael Peterson was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his wife. However, in 2012, he was granted a retrial after it was uncovered that a witness for the prosecution had given false evidence under oath. Michael released from jail in 2017. That was about 89 months in prison. And after that, he entered an Alford plea, which means he was able to maintain his innocence and he would be sentenced to time served and no further charges would be made against him, Joe.
Yeah, you're right, Jackie. And I think, reflectively, you begin to think about the swirl of interest in this particular case. And the public is rightly interested in this because, even as someone that I consider myself to be rather seasoned when it comes to death investigation, I have to tell you, in all of my years, I've never encountered a case quite this complex, certainly one that I've never worked. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Running my small business was like playing basketball 5-on-1, and I was the one. Now, QuickBooks gives me access to a team of AI agents and trusted experts for the assists I need. Nothing but net.
Outdo it with Intuit QuickBooks. Feature availability varies by product.
Are you a fraud-paying American? 1 in 4 tax-paying Americans has been a victim of identity fraud. With LifeLock, if your identity is stolen, they fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Last year, billions in refunds were stolen. Could be from your salary, overtime, or second job. Gone. But this year, you don't need to stay a victim. Because this tax season, fraud-paying American is something no American should have to claim. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/iHeart. Terms apply.
Owning a home is full of surprises. Some wonderful, some not so much. And when something breaks, it can feel like the whole day unravels. That's why HomeServe exists. For as little as $4.99 a month, you'll always have someone to call. A trusted professional ready to help, bringing peace of mind to 4.5 million homeowners nationwide. For plans starting at just $4.99 a month, go to homeserve.com. That's homeserve.com. Not available everywhere. Most plans range between $4.99 to $11.99 a month your first year. Terms apply on covered repairs.
Picture chicken nuggets in your head. Okay, now forget them. Because Taco Bell's crispy chicken nuggets are here. And they're nothing like the nuggets you know. All white meat chicken, coated in tortilla chips for that signature Taco Bell crunch. A nugget like that calls for a sauce that can keep up. Introducing Hidden Valley Diablo Ranch. The iconic ranch you love, fired up with Taco Bell Diablo sauce. Bold meets bolder. Ranch meets Diablo, and it works. Crispy chicken nuggets from Taco Bell, a brand new classic. At participating U.S. Taco Bell locations for a limited time only, while supplies last.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.